Welcome to Rated Radio Plus. I'm your host, Shane Wyndham. This is Tears for Fears versus Mike and the Mechanics. Let's dig in. So both of these artists are ones I just selfishly wanted to cover, so we're going to do exactly that. And we'll start with Mike and the Mechanics. The album that rolled at random was Beggar on a Beach of Gold from 1995. Out of the 13 tracks, I thought 4 were great. My bottom track was the cover You've Really Got a Hold on Me, and my top track was A House of Many Rooms. The music makes me feel like my elementary PE teacher is trying to teach me about how the world really is. This is still very much the Mike and the Mechanics you're probably used to from their earlier hits, only the hokey quality of the productions has gotten a bit too substantial. There's also something plastic present here, where the earlier efforts tended much more toward an endearing degree of tape warmth. You put these things together and it almost feels like a preamble to late 90s or early 2000s pop cheese. I hate having to admit this too, because many of these songs are both lyrically unique and soundly composed. While you can expect a number of surprise winners from the weeds of this spin, it highlights why switching from the 5-scale ratings to a 10-scale format had begun striking me as so necessary, as most of this scrapes by in terms of 5s, but doesn't go much further, and that would have in the past put this on par with much stronger albums at a glance when I honestly believe it doesn't deserve to be thought of as anything close to a perfect album. My co-host would gladly clarify for you too, were she here, that I'm one of the few people you'll meet 30 years out from the group's peak who's still apt to bring them up in conversation as an outfit worthy of your time. I further hate having to be so fair weather with much of this review because it contains one of the group's greatest tracks. The fair shake though is that too much of the affair is half-baked. Sometimes the chorus melodies don't change, sometimes the bridges are quick as a cough afterthoughts, and some of the instrumental quirk has aged like 90s film CGI. But these expectation-setting critiques shouldn't lead you to think this is a complete wash either. The disc is listenable, impressively so in certain places. The covers fit that. If you're going to do covers, don't make carbon copies of the originals, Bill. Mixed though my feelings on them are, and this probably felt like a decent return to the 80s for fans of the group upon its release. But I tend to think of the album as akin to a Don Henley solo album, where the earlier work from the group would be more in line with a full-fledged Eagles effort. Again, this analogy is only for comparative purposes. I'm definitely not saying the band sounds like Eagles. Some of it's growing on me with subsequent listens, but not to a degree that's going to make me recommend this to most anyone other than folks who already know they've a soft spot for Mike and his dang old Mechanics. Those impressed with the totality of this spin are, in my opinion, too easily impressed. Come for the big winners and own that the rest is like bathing with no soap. It's better than no bath at all, but you ain't about to go flashing that butthole for inspection. And I, my good people, was born to inspect your buttholes. Yep, that's really how I chose to end my long-awaited Mike and the Mechanics review. Lord, let's take a break. The TikTok Billboard hit I listened to this time around was a song called Pelagrosa by Floyd Manor. It's all put together. Again, what are artists these days doing with their names? Where to even begin with this one? It's a Spanish auto-tune, wannabe gangster club song about clearly being beyond ready to fuck a girl you're attracted to, and dude keeps comparing her to guns throughout. It starts out sounding like, and I kid you not, Paul McCartney's Wonderful Christmas Time, before bouncing into a Spacey Gamer soundtrack instrumental bass that clearly wears its Latin influences on its sleeve. Then it randomly tries to pull some Weekend-esque change-up on us about 2/3 of the way through the track, to weak effect. The vocals are too often whiny mumble slurring, and the auto-tune is way too heavy. There's not enough length here to let anything build much of any momentum, and even though I clearly hear the catchy part of the track that's only gone over twice, which is nice, I wouldn't willingly listen to this again. It's not atrocious, but fails to even make the cut as background enjoyment in my ears. 3 out of 10 stars from me. Now let's go talk about Tears for Fears. I've got a head cold, by the way, so I apologize if I sound nasally. The album I spun by Tears for Fears at random was The Seeds of Love from 1989. Out of the 8 tracks, I thought 6 were great. My bottom track was Year of the Knife, and my top track was Woman in Chains, but I've got to say, Badman's song is a technical marvel. The music makes me feel like I'm exploring the 8th continent of the world with peace-seeking sirens. I spent most of my time with this record thinking there's no way in hell I'd be able to describe it. The thing is the epitome of what I think most musicians who take music very seriously expect that they'd do if they ever saw success leave their group with a massive budget with which to make something artistically unfeasible for the average band. So while yes, this is a pop record on some levels, you should neither expect it to be easily accessible or anything close to typical pop. Far more accurate to call this an art house record, which is probably unlike anything you've ever heard before. The comparable sounds I eventually landed on to set your expectations include Pink Floyd's psychedelic range and float, Sade's deep love R&B grooves, and that darkly addicting Genesis prog. It has a tendency to be overindulgent near the end of some tracks. The song structures can be hard to follow at times if you're seeking predictability, and the vocals sit a bit too deep in the vibrant wall of sound to make them feel anywhere close to being the most important part of what you're hearing. Oh, and it's not so much that the disc runs out of steam near the end, as that it gets further and further away from what would easily chart on the radio. As a person who's written some songs in my lifetime, I adore this disc for the fever dream of artistry that it is. Seriously, it's got all the random oddity of a Salvador Dali painting, while being as soothing in its swirl as the better works of Vincent van Gogh. The inclusion of Oleta Adams' vocals are also an undeniably great choice, and the production is masterful. You can just tell that the time and money and talent it must have taken to toss in all the little pieces along the epic totality must have been a tremendous undertaking. That all being said, this is anything but music that's meant for everyone. It may strike many listeners as being as far from what they're used to hearing on Hitsville FM as world music is. So the potential for nearly everything here to fly right over a lot of people's heads is pretty damn high. Even I can admit I long for a bit more predictable pop, the likes of their previous hits, than what you're afforded by this listen. But if you're a serious fan of complexity and originality in the music you take on, then I'd say that even pop haters should approach this as a before I die kind of listen, because it's a gorgeous kaleidoscope of sound that I've heard nowhere else before. Not quite like this anyway. And I apologize for the vehicles up and down the street and the planes in the air and yada yada. You've heard this from other people a lot of times. You know what's up. I can't control every little sound that's made in the outside world. The meticulous intentionality of each moment of this disc calls to mind a lot of Steely Dan, but the kitchen sink approach to its big picture may leave a lot of folks feeling off-put if the idea of going to a fancy restaurant and trying a little bit of the entire menu doesn't sound like fun. If, like me though, that piques your interest, then trust that this is a disc to write home about. Please like or subscribe if you're still listening, and remember you can send all kinds of feedback to rated_radio@yahoo.com. Tears for Fears clearly took the lead in this matchup, and I think Mike and the Mechanics did an accidentally good job of highlighting why it's always struck me as a mistake that the Fear Tears are categorized so carelessly as a pop group, given pop meant something quite different when both of these outfits were on top of the world. And though I'm much more familiar with the Mechanics' deep dive material than I am with this week's winner, I feel pretty correct in contending now that Tears for Fears deserve to be known for more than their hits. Mike and the Mechanics may prove too content to rest on simple song structures at times, while pulling no punches at others, but they also created some of my favorite 80s music. So this was a fun matchup, worth a listen no matter which way you slice the groups, meaning don't sleep on either outfit when it comes to looking for more than their hits. They're both definitely worth that deep dive. So that's going to do it for now. Catch the main show every Friday at 9 a.m. and I'll be back with more Rated Radio Plus in 2 weeks. Plenty of time to fill your world with music.